All right, hello. What you see before you on the screen is a chart for the 28th of July, 1914. This is the date they give for the start of World War I. And let me explain why I have decided to look at this chart is because in my life online, consuming content, consuming media, one of the things that I have noticed recently is a trend towards a conversation around things like apocalypse, the end of the world, very doom and gloom kind of stuff. And I have to admit, though, that most of the time when people are talking about this, they don't mean like literally the world ending, but they're talking about, big changes that are happening or things that can, from a certain perspective, like I mean, I'll put it a different way that, like, if you were indigenous people who were being colonized, then from that perspective, it's kind of like an end of the world that's happening, right? But it's not like it's only within a certain perspective, right? But anyways, I I feel a bit off about the popularity or how common this kind of language is. Like oftentimes you may see people who are like, how to live your best life during the apocalypse. And I'm like, is it really the apocalypse? And while those kinds of things may be open to interpretation and open to different definitions and stuff, there are certain things like historical moments such as World War I and World War II, and some people may take the approach that as far as apocalypses go, this was a veritable apocalypse, and we are in the aftermath of it. We are already in a post-apocalyptic world, right? But or you could say that the apocalypse happens all the time, or whatever, right? Not to say that it's not a big deal, but my basic approach to this video, or what I'm trying to do here, was I was basically thinking that I don't think that World War III is about to break out. Um, that whatever changes or whatever things may be going on, I don't think it's going to be a world war situation. But nonetheless, doesn't mean that there isn't heavy astrology or there isn't dramatic astrology. Um, so one of the first, I'll do it in kind of sequential order here. First off, one of the things you may notice that while Pluto is at the 1 degree of Cancer when this happened, Saturn was at 27 degrees. And over the period, it lasted for about 4 years or so. So if you skip ahead a little bit, already we can see this lineup in Cancer with Saturn and Pluto, right? And Saturn and Pluto is generally the signature that people use for these kinds of the archetype of an apocalypse feeling situation, because Pluto can feel very kind of like when you put these things together, Saturn being like darkness and old age and death and stuff, with Pluto being like the walls are caving in on you and you're being forced into some kind of situation that is all the Saturn Pluto signature tends to be what people associate with this. And there's also, as you can see, Neptune around this time. Neptune, when it started, Neptune was in Cancer as well, and Neptune ingresses into Leo. And then eventually, towards the end of it, what you end up getting here, exactly 3 years after it starts, you get Saturn conjunct Neptune in Leo, right? And right now we have Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, and eventually these two planets are going to conjoin around, and then they're going to ingress into Aries together, right? So there is, and if you read Rick Tarnas's book Cosmos and Psyche, and you read the chapter on Saturn and Neptune, it's not really that cheery, right? So there's it's a kind of a dark and heavy transit to go to with Saturn and Neptune. And once you're a few years into World War I and trench warfare and all this kind of stuff, yeah, sure, Saturn and Neptune is a pretty heavy deal, right? Um, but I'll show you again. Apparently, the date they use for the start of World War II. I have to also say I'm no historian or anything. I'm just a guy who's into astrology, and I'm just showing you from that perspective. This is the chart for what we would say is the beginning of World War II. And what I find particularly striking is that if you look at Saturn and Pluto, that here you have Pluto in Leo at 0, 2, and here you have Saturn at 0, 0. So this is what is known as a square, right? A square between the fixed signs. And one of the things that's interesting about this was that Uranus, around the start of World War II, Uranus was in Taurus, very similar to the position where it is now, right? But as we move along, there's something interesting that happened 1940 that you can see that there had what we call the grand conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn happened in Taurus as World War II was being set in motion, and that happened in proximity to the planet Uranus in Taurus. And I have to admit that this is actually somewhat similar to the placements we have now, because we have Jupiter in Taurus and we have Uranus in Taurus. However, what we don't have is we don't have Saturn in Taurus. And when it started, we had a perfect square with Saturn and Pluto. And it's also kind of interesting that that this had a a trine going with Neptune in Virgo to Uranus and Taurus. But anyways, let's forget about all that. Let's go back to, let's say, March of 2020. Okay. So this was around the time like coronavirus had already started, but it was in March of 2020 where I was living that the lockdowns and all this stuff really started to come into effect. And a lot of astrologers leading up to 2020 had a lot of, they were expecting maybe it would be like World War III or something, because if you look at this signature between Saturn and Pluto that I was talking about, that we had a conjunction of Saturn and Pluto around the time of World War I, and then you had a square between Saturn and Pluto around the time of World War II, that around the time the coronavirus pandemic in 2020 really happened, you had the Saturn and Pluto conjunction, and you also had Jupiter getting in on it. And you also had Mars there too, which really set things off. So that already happened, right? Um, so what the pattern seems to be, anyways, is that with these whole world war things that happened in the 20th century, that it started with a very tight aspect between Saturn and Pluto, and then at least for near the end of World War One, once you got 3 or 4 years into it, then you had a conjunction between Saturn and Neptune, right? And so if we progress along here to 2023, we're going to go into 2024 here and then just kind of move it along. As you can see, eventually we're going to be getting that Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Well, this kind of looks like a bit of a mess. So we're into 2025 here. Bear with me. I'm kind of being a bit messy about this. So anyways, you can see Saturn's at 14, Neptune's at 27, and this is in 2025, so this is already, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. But here's this one looks better. 2026, you see Saturn and Neptune together. So this is already basically like, let's put this together in a try to explain what I'm saying here. That when it comes to things like big catastrophic global things like world wars and whatnot, they seem to start with a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, right? And World War One, near the end of it, had this Saturn-Neptune thing, right? And when Pluto is going to be ingressing into Aquarius, right? Using the kind of I'm not an archetypal astrologer like Rick Tarnas, so I like actually respecting and using the sign distinctions, but and not using like massive 20-degree orbs or things like that, right? That if you were to look at a chart that has Pluto in Aquarius at 2 degrees and Neptune and Saturn here, like in this chart, Saturn and Neptune do not see Pluto. It's what you call an aversion, right? Now, eventually, the next year, 2027, Saturn and Neptune will be in Aries, and there will be a sextile between Pluto and Saturn and Neptune. Now, when something like the big world war has happened, there were hard aspects, meaning they were either conjunctions, which technically a conjunction isn't even an aspect, it's its own thing, or they were squares, right? A sextile, and not only this, but you've got this sextile happening between Pluto and Aquarius, Saturn, Neptune and Aries, and Uranus and Gemini. So you have a nice soft aspects happening between these outer planets. And no, this isn't a opposition. Like another thing to also remind you is that when we had September 11th happening, you had a opposition between Pluto and Saturn. Maybe I can just pull that one up. So September 11th. Now, keep in mind, I have Vancouver as the location, so I'm not being that, I'm not doing an exact chart for the moment that things happen. I'm being a bit loose here, right? But if you look at this, you had, on the day of September 11th, you had Saturn in Gemini, right? And Pluto in Sagittarius. And look, they're only 2 degrees off. So there's this thing about when the sort of bad stuff starts, or these triggering events seem to happen around Saturn, Pluto, hard aspects or conjunctions, right? And whatever it is that we are heading into the long-term future, I feel like the shock of the coronavirus pandemic has already happened, and basically what we're looking at is the playing out of the aftermath of all this, right? So let's go to back to something like 2025. We're going to be having this thing. We're going to have Pluto entering Aquarius next year, and for a good chunk of time, Pluto is going to be in Aquarius and Saturn and Neptune will be in Pisces, and they're not going to see each other at all. Meaning the dynamic, the archetypal dynamic that we associate with the beginning of world wars, with the beginning of big global cataclysms like pandemics and stuff, that this is a period of time where this will really not be active at all, because you don't make an aspect just from one sign to another. The aspect is only going to happen. The traditional aspect is only going to happen in 2027, and it's going to be a sextile. It's not going to be a square. It's not going to be an opposition. It's not going to be a conjunction. It's going to be a soft sextile, which is of the nature of Venus. So this is the kind of thing I don't, whatever is going to be happening, I don't think we have to worry about World War III. I don't think we have to worry about another corona. The thing is, I could always be wrong. I'm not saying I'm completely infallible, but I figured I would make this video to sort of make this is how I see it right now. What do you guys think? maybe you can leave your take in the comments, but this is just my take looking at the astrology. And honestly, a lot of these people who are making, there's some people who are making videos like, how to live your best life in the end times and the apocalypse. And just got dental work done, and up until recently you had to get metal mercury fillings. Like, you didn't even have, like, now we can have, you can get your teeth filled without putting heavy metals in your mouth. To me, this doesn't seem like the end of the world. It seems like things are actually getting quite comfortable, right? But I don't know, that's just me. Let me know what you guys think. Thank you very much for watching.